Today, we're in search of getting more bass out of our bass drum, and for lovers of the jaw tuning, we're going to be breaking the jaw today. The video that we're doing today is a direct reference to something that we discussed briefly in our previous video about the moon mic and just how much low end we're actually getting out of the bass drum, both when we're recording it and also just acoustically in the room. The phenomenon that we're talking about here is adding tension to the batter head of the bass drum to effectively lower the perceived pitch of the drum and give us more low end when intuition might tell us that that's the wrong direction to go. From time to time, we've referenced in the past, and we'll also reference today, the idea of jaw tuning. Jaw, for anyone who doesn't know, is an acronym for just above a wrinkle, and it indicates a tuning that is so low that the head is practically wrinkled. This is a great starting point for a lot of sounds, and depending on what you're looking for out of your instrument, it can be a viable solution for getting a solid sound out of any of your drums. Our first example today is going to be literally that, just above a wrinkle, really just above finger tight on the batter head here. Let's hear how the drum sounds at this tuning. As we move through these tunings today, we're going to talk a little bit about both what is good about them and also what is differentiating them from the others in a positive way. The primary thing we're getting out of this tuning is attack, attack, attack. There's nothing wrong with that if you're in a playing situation where you want a tremendous amount of attack and are perhaps going to use EQ or something else to give us back some low end. It's totally viable. It's also the most slappy feeling tuning. When you hit the drum, it's not bouncy at all. The beater hits it, it feels essentially like hitting a head with no tension on it. The bass drum has a ported front head on it, which is adding to just how punchy this sound is, and we also have a pillow inside of it, which is going to remain for all of the sounds we do today. In order to ensure that you're hearing the most complete sound of this drum from both the high frequencies and the low and very low, in conjunction with our D12 VR on the resonant side of the drum, we're also using the moon mic. This mic is not adding low end or changing the sound in any way, it's simply allowing us to capture the fullest spectrum of the drum so we're not leaving anything on the table. Let's hear a little more of the jaw tuning. As we mentioned earlier, there's nothing wrong with this sound, but it is lacking in actual low end and it is lacking in resonance. It's a very short sound. So now we want to add some tension to the batter head, not very much, just a little bit, and see what happens to the sound of the drum with that subtle change. Rather than separating out each of these sounds, we're going to do comparisons back to back right away so that you can really hear the difference, because while it is a little bit subtle, it is also dramatic in the room, and provided again that you're using good headphones, you will be able to hear the change in pitch of the drum, and it's going to be surprising. The drum with a little more tension on the batter head is exhibiting what seems like more low end and a lower pitch than the previous tuning, even though we added tension to the head. What's really going on here is we're able to perceive the fundamental because there's enough tension on the head for it to have resonance and thus project that fundamental. With jaw tuning, the fundamental that is present is stifled by how low the head is tuned, and some of it is actually so low that we can't hear it anyway, just by physics. In addition to the jaw tuning having very little perceivable fundamental, the power of the attack in that tuning far overshadows anything else that we could be listening for when we strike the drum. It bears repeating that again, this is not one is good and one is bad. This is giving us a real-world, real-time comparison that shows that adding tension is actually where you get the low end out of your bass drum. We aren't making changes to the resonant head. If we were choosing to do that, we could further sculpt the sound that way, but for today's demonstrations, again, we're just sticking to the batter head and allowing the resonance to stay where it is. Let's hear a little bit more of the second tuning. Let's pause for a second and talk about big, boomy sounds from drums that have a ton of low end in them. The first name that jumps to mind for me, particularly in rock, is John Bonham. A lot of people that I've spoken to misinterpret the sounds they hear when they listen to John Bonham as being tuned low because they are, in effect, a very low-pitched sound between the toms and also the bass drum. The truth of the matter is that he chose very large drums and then tuned them higher than you might expect in an effort to get more resonance out of the drum, which results in more low end being projected and overall a much larger sound from the instrument than you get when you tune them very, very low and then also choose smaller drums to do that on. When you tune for resonance and then put those drums in a space that is also resonant, perhaps a room that doesn't have a ton of sound baffling or a performance space that has high ceilings and wide walls, there's plenty of room for that sound to further grow in the space, and even more, you're going to get the idea that these are big sounds making big low end and that are carrying through the space to you and also to the audience. Rather than leaving it there, we want to go up a little bit higher on the batter head for a third sound that's going to get us even further into that higher tuning. Again, we're not adding a lot. I added about a quarter of a turn on there. Let's see what that sounds like. This sound, again, perceives to go lower, even though we added tension to it. But this is all about resonance. It always comes back to resonance, especially when it comes to low frequencies like this, because they move so slowly, we have to set up the drum in a way where they're allowed to do what they want to do. On the flip side, we are starting to lose some of the attack, and we are also starting to lose some of the length of resonance. It's turning into a shorter, punchier, and rounder sound, which maybe isn't appropriate for the music that we want to make today, but it might be appropriate for the music tomorrow. Between the second tuning and the third tuning, enough tension was also applied to stifle the sub-frequencies that were present in tuning number 2, but that were also missing from tuning number 1. This means for us that, depending on what sort of sound you're looking for, there's a spectrum of low tunings with a given bass drum that are going to exhibit varying degrees of attack, sub, and fundamental, and as you move through all of those, you can find your stopping points that are getting you exactly what you're looking for, whether it's an acoustic sound or something that you expect to mic and even be processed for recording. If you're curious why we're not giving specific prescriptions for any of these tunings or tensions or any of the changes that we're making to this drum right now, that's because experimentation is the key to figuring out what's going to work for you with your drum in your room and with all the other variables involved. If you have a different kind of beater on your bass drum pedal or a different brand or thickness of batter head on the drum, the subtleties are going to change. The overarching change will be similar, but I want you to experiment. We experiment to find the things that work for us here, and we want you to do the same. An added bonus of moving through these tensions is also a playing bonus, and it is expanding your capacity to interact with a bass drum that's tuned different ways. There's not enough talk about this. A jaw-tuned batter head doesn't feel anything like a pitched-up single-ply drum with a felt strip on it and no pillow in there. If we can familiarize ourselves with how to play drums that are set up differently, this goes for any drum, but particularly bass drums, at least for me, it allows me to feel comfortable with experimentation and broadens the palette for choices that I have in a playing situation or perhaps in a live situation where the sound you brought from home is not going to work. A boomy sound in a boomy room or a dead sound in a really dead room. If you can make changes and be comfortable, all the better. Common sense tells us that bass drums make low frequencies. Bass, it's in the name. But this experiment today is a perfect opportunity to remember that leaving our preconceived notions at the door and making sure that we test any theory or hypothesis or prescription that gets thrown our way is the only way to truly know and then generate wisdom about what the instruments are capable of so that we can get the most out of them anytime we sit down to play.